everybody. Welcome to the 10th session of the Inspire Education Summit. And what a fantastic time it has been so far. I have absolutely loved the variety of sessions we've had, the different perspectives on how we might change education for the better, both within and outside the mainstream system. I've been struck by the collective positive energy, the optimism, and the potential power we have to orchestrate change when we support each other and work together. And the common thread through it all has been a focus on the individuals who are part of the system, a desire to support and care for them as whole human beings, as respected individuals, and as autonomous agents of their own lives. And that includes the young learners, but also teachers, facilitators, and school leaders. When Jo and I first came up with this idea for the summit, we wanted to bring action to a space where we saw so much struggle and challenge. Through her organisation, Progressive Education, Jo has brought together people who are involved in many, many new ways of learning and a community on Facebook who are disenfranchised with the mainstream system options. There's a lot of collective pain in there, but the way out of pain is action. And the summit is here to spur you on to do something, to make a difference. Jo and I are launching a membership platform on Monday that is all about action. It's for those who have dreamt of, thought about, planned, or even started their own school or learning community. It's a space where we can connect, collaborate, and learn together. It's what I would have wanted years ago when I first came up with an idea for my own school. And we're opening it up next Monday at the final session of our summit at 7:30 p.m. GMT. So come along then to find out more, or check your emails next week if you can't make that session. I was in my own personal minefield a few years ago when I felt passionate and fired up, but completely stuck. I felt like I had all this energy, but nowhere to burn it. I wasn't even sure what my skills were anymore, even after I had done a degree and I had a career for more than 10 years. Then I started my Limitless podcast. Finally, I had a feeling I was doing something good in the world, using my skills and actually loving what I was doing. The action I was taking made me finally feel like I was doing something worthwhile. And the people I was meeting along the way made me feel like I was finally part of a community of like-minded individuals. And all the way through this, there'd been one burning desire in my life, which was to home educate my daughter. I felt like it was an impossible dream somehow. I didn't know whether it was the right thing to do. I was worried I might ruin her life or that we'd regret it or something. But the more I learnt about home education and unschooling, the more I knew that it was what I wanted for her. She's very intrinsically motivated, and I felt like home education was the best way to bring that out of her. Understanding more about home education looks like, or sorry, what home education looked like was what brought me to this very clear conclusion of what I wanted to do. And our guest speaker tonight was one of the inspirations that led me there. Dr. Gina Riley, who I heard speak at the Summerhill Festival a couple of years ago, is a joyful and optimistic force for education out of school and within school as well. She's an educational psychologist, a program director, and a clinical professor of adolescent special education at City University of New York, Hunter College, and has conducted significant research on homeschooling and unschooling. Her research extends to self-directed learning environments, supported decision-making, and online, hybrid, and high-flex education, having been actively involved in this field since 1998. She's the author of numerous academic articles and 3 books, including one called The Homeschooling Starter Guide, which one lucky attendee tonight will be winning a copy of. So look out for that after her session. So Gina, without any further ado, please welcome to the Inspire Education Summit tonight. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Alex. And thank you, Joe, for organizing this conference. It is incredible. And I'm looking at all the people and all their interests and their introductions. So keep introducing yourselves. I'm so excited to be with you all. So I'm going to do a short introduction, and then a short presentation. And I know afterward we're going to do a Q&A also. So I'm so excited again to be with you all. And I will begin my presentation, which is entitled Intrinsic Motivation and Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom. So, if you don't know me, I am a researcher of homeschooling and unschooling and other self directed learning environments. And my research focus since 1998 has always been intrinsic motivation, cognitive evaluation theory, self determination theory, and alternative forms of teaching and learning. I'm the author of 3 books. Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom is an academic book on unschooling. And then you have the more public book, Homeschooling Starter Guide, as well as The Joys of Self Determined Learning. Most recently, I've published research on unschooling students with disabilities, as well as a 10-year follow-up study in unschooling in Hong Kong. So we're super excited about that. I always like to frame my talks because I know audiences come from all different areas. And I'm a person, as a program director and professor of special education, that also lives in a world of school. So I don't only live in the world of homeschooling. The students I teach are all students in an adolescent special education program at CUNY Hunter College. They teach teachers in the New York City Department of Education. So every time I talk, I just want to frame that, right? I have experience in both worlds. When I talk about homeschooling, it's the education of students at home or out in the world, usually by parents and using some sort of curriculum. And when I talk about unschooling, this is a branch of education that is formed through everyday life experiences and exploration and interaction with the environment. So I always just like to frame before I have a conversation with you all. When I talk about self determination theory, I'm always talking about the theory written by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan of the University of Rochester. And we'll go through the theory as well as the sub theory, cognitive evaluation theory, because I think that's what really shapes the homeschool and unschool environment. So, why have I studied intrinsic motivation for almost a lifetime now? The fact is, it fascinates me, right? The fact that children and teens can learn on their own with no adult coercion and through their own intrinsic motivations is incredible. I've personally been researching self directed education since 1998. I did unschool my own child through his first day of school was his first day of college. So all the time I'm like researching, I'm working. I was a single mom. So at the time I was working and I was going to school and I was doing my research and I was unschooling my child. And I did all this research that was mainly ignored, which was fine. I did it for me, right? I wasn't doing it for any extrinsic purpose. And then COVID happened. And in those first 2 weeks of COVID, we all unschooled. And then a lot of people started moving to homeschooling even after COVID. And so that really changed the game for all of us. In terms of homeschooling stats in the United States, homeschooling is now the fastest growing form of education in the United States. Almost 7 to 10% of students in the United States are currently home educated. Interest is really expanding in the United States and beyond day by day. National Homeschooling Association reports thousands of calls per day instead of the couple that they usually got. And then you see more families pursuing self directed alternatives more than ever before and asking questions about homeschooling and unschooling and a transition between school and homeschool to unschooling. There was an article last year in the Washington Post, and again, to see homeschooling and unschooling in national news in the Washington Post and the New York Times and in the Rolling Stone is incredible to me because if you remember, I was homeschooling at a time when we really kept things quiet. Homeschooling is rising from the fringe and really is the fastest growing form of education now in the United States, which I think is just incredible. And there's been a ton of press and media on homeschooling and unschooling, especially in recent months. You had the Rolling Stone very controversial article about unschooling. You had the New York Times during COVID really digging deep into unschooling. And during that time, I was publishing books about unschooling and homeschooling based on the massive body of research that I've accumulated. There's also been such growth and interest in research on self-directed learning models. So you'll see research on North Star and World Schooling and Princeton Learning Cooperative and Summerhill, which I had the pleasure of visiting 2 years ago, and all of these self-directed learning centers that are really coming in, right, being part of the choices that we all have for the education of our children every day. I've always thought and theorized that unschooling follows a student's intrinsic motivation to learn. And that's really the theoretical perspective that falls behind unschooling. My research has always focused on self-determination theory, which really defines the term of intrinsic motivation, right? Doing things for the joy and the love and the curiosity. And then it's sub-theory, cognitive evaluation theory, right? Which are the environmental tenets that facilitate intrinsic motivation in kids. And we'll talk about those environmental tenets, but all of my research really circles around this theory and this sub-theory. I love so much that intrinsic motivation can create a different environment for learning. Instead of learning because they have to, kids learn because they want to. And don't we all want that, right? In both homeschool and school contexts. I love this quote, right? It's clearly a manifestation of our human propensity to assimilate and integrate knowledge. It's really all about kids and teens following a natural acquisition of curiosity and knowledge and learning. And that's the most beautiful thing I think about homeschooling and particularly the unschooling environment. So as we think about the definition of self-determination theory, and I'm going to stop the share for a second and see what's in the chat. I just love seeing, but as we talk and think about the definition of self-determination theory, I really want to dig deep into this sub-theory, right? Because cognitive evaluation theory and the three tenets of competence, autonomy, and relatedness are so important to give us a basis for the unschooling environment. Because what unschoolers and homeschoolers all around the world are doing is they're really facilitating a sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness in their kids. And that's the learning environment. So we know that a sense of competence comes from success experiences and overall positive experiences about an activity. And that in and of itself facilitates intrinsic motivation. And kids and we as adults are all driven by a need for competence. We like doing things that make us happy. We like doing things that make us feel good. And we like doing things that we feel feelings of success from. And this doesn't have to be academic things, right? It could be a lot of people feel success from video gaming and they level up and they're so excited because there's some success that really happens in there. People might have a specific interest that they really can see themselves getting good at, right? Competence is really the purest form of assessment, right? So when you think about learning, there's this planning aspect and there's this instruction aspect, and then there's this assessment aspect. And I always tell my students that are going in a traditional graduate school that, competence is that assessment type feeling. It's like doing something and knowing you do it well. We see competence in the joy in young kids' faces. We see competence in the joy in kids and teens' faces when they really put together things, right? Either an idea or a theory or a game. And we really see it when they show their strengths to us. So competence always facilitates intrinsic motivation. So it really is all about fostering students' interests and talents and strengths. And in my research with Peter Gray on unschooling, we really saw that generally more time being able to explore those interests equals greater competency in those areas. Then you have the second subset of cognitive evaluation theory, which is a sense of autonomy. And I'm spending particular time these days really examining the concept of autonomy and what Deci and Ryan theorize as autonomy support. So when we talk about autonomy, right, this is when an individual is given a sense of choice, an acknowledgement of feelings, an opportunity for self-direction. And when they are given that, feelings of intrinsic satisfaction is enhanced. Right. So this looks like the time to pursue freedom and interest and independence. It's like the best ever Saturday, right? Sue Wolf Patterson will say, like, unschooling's like the best ever Saturday. And it really is. It's like the best ever Saturday where you plan your whole day based on what you love. In unschooling, what Peter Gray and I saw was children really were able to dive deeply into subjects that mattered to them. They were able to spend time into topics that interested them. They also participated in the real world, right? And they gained skills through that participation. In my field of education, we talk a lot about generalization of learning or taking what you learned and being able to really apply it to real world contexts. And I would argue, and I have argued, and there's a quote somewhere where I say, unschooling is the best form of generalized learning that I've ever encountered. Students in an unschool environment are really able to take what they've learned and apply it to the real world. We also talk a lot about time, right? That maybe the real key to an unschooling education is time. And both for children and parents alike, right? Time to think, time to absorb, time to make our own decisions. And if you think about the structure of school and if you think about the structure of our rushed days, we don't have a lot of time to absorb unless we make that time, right? So unschooling gives kids and teens time to absorb and integrate information. And that's really, really important. And that's such a gift. There's also this concept of autonomy support. I'm doing a lot of research on decision making and the ways people of all ages and within all types of school make decisions. And one of the things I'm seeing is that the best form of like decision making is what's called supported decision making, right? Or making decisions with support. And so, unschooling always provides this autonomy support. You have your path, you have your interests, you have your strengths, and then you have an adult nearby who can assist whenever you need them to assist. And that's where individual choice comes in, right? Kids and teens get to really practice decision making and individual choice within an unschooling and homeschooling environment, but they know that they always have autonomy support. They know they have the support to make their own decisions, but also the help if they need it. And so doing this, providing an environment that really elevates an individual's personal freedom, offers meaningful choices. I mean, this is where, intrinsic motivation like thrives. And then, of course, we all know that an individual's intrinsic motivation is more likely to flourish when there's a sense of security and relatedness. And a lot of people like to think about attachment theory and think that this relationship just happens during infancy and toddlerhood and childhood, right? But in truth, relatedness is super important as a student grows older in the teen years and beyond. Students really need to know that there is one person that they can lean on that will support them and support their autonomous decisions no matter what. If you come from a psychological perspective, I always think of like Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard here. That, talking about relatedness is like talking about this unconditional positive regard or love that really comes from providing the person you love with autonomy, but also, listen, if anything goes wrong, I'll have your back. Deci Ryan will say that relatedness is based upon interpersonal affiliation, authentic care, the sharing of enriching experiences. People can feel related to their parents, to their peers, to their community, to the outside world. Long ago, for my doctoral dissertation, I did a comparison of competence, autonomy, and relatedness in both traditionally schooled and homeschooled kids. And what we found, like we thought that intrinsic motivation and the concept of relatedness would grow deeper in traditionally schooled kids because they had like a lot of peers around them and the community around them. But what we found was that relatedness was higher in the homeschooled population because of the authentic relationships they felt within their communities, within their families, with their peers. And so that's really always interesting to me. And again, the concept of an autonomy supportive relationship is super important, right? The right to make one's own independent decisions, but with support and with people who support you. Relatedness also has this beautiful link to cultural transmission, which is another real strength of homeschooling and unschooling. We know that homeschoolers and unschoolers are not home a lot, right? A lot of times, homeschoolers and unschoolers are out in the world, they're with family, they're with relatives, they're with peers, they're with their community. And there's a lot of intergenerational learning that takes place within this environment. And so when we talk about the power of cultural transmission and the power of culturally responsive teaching, here's where homeschooling and unschooling come in, right? Cultural transmission is born of attachment. It's intrinsically motivated. It's imparted through the various forms of intelligence, but it lies in the relationship between people. We do a lot of cultural learning by observing and being with others. I know you had Zoe Neal here yesterday, and I'm so excited that she was. And I really always love the quote of my own criterion of success by A.S. Neal is the ability to work joyfully and positively. And, I really have always thought, but also through research now know that intrinsically motivated, self directed learning is really the best way to live in a positive, healthy way. My book, Unschooling Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom, dives deep into the research end of unschooling. But it also acknowledges that, it's not just about homeschooling and unschooling. There are so many ways we could take the tenets of unschooling and homeschooling and apply it to our own lives, apply it to different school structures, apply it to free and democratic and public and private and charter schools. So at the end of my book, I always say, like, there's many ways to unschool, but it's my hope that young people find the way that works for them. It's definitely the future of education. I know as in my job teaching teachers, right? Like they ask me behind closed doors about unschooling and they're curious and they want to know. I don't really talk about it a lot within my program, but everyone seems to have all these questions, which is amazing. And I want people to be asking questions about unschooling and intrinsically motivated learning. And I don't think unschooling is just homeschooling, right? It can be beyond the traditional classroom, and it's indeed the future of education. And so, in that same lens, all of my research is really focused on unschooling, is focused on intrinsically motivated learning. But I also go in and I look at different school structures and I think and talk about how they might also be rooted in intrinsic motivation. So, In Press is a study on Astronova, which was a school that Elon Musk founded. Really super interesting study. Again, that unschooling in Hong Kong, I can't wait till that comes out. It's a 10-year follow-up written with Maggie Woods, and it's just really seeing her and her life and how it progressed, and now she's a amazingly successful adult. I'm excited about my second edition of Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom. I'm doing a follow-up study that Peter Gray and I did on adults who have been unschooled. And then I also have a large curriculum grant where I created with a group of others a decision-making curriculum for students with disabilities. And that curriculum is free for all. Feel free to go to the website. I'll share my slides. That curriculum is free for all to use, whether you're in traditional school environments or unschool and homeschool environments. And I also can't wait in the future to really dig deep into statistics and data on homeschooling and unschooling, both nationally and internationally. So that's where my future research is going to lie. And we're going to talk about this, but always like I love your questions. I love your queries. I love talking to people. So feel free to connect if you have any questions. I know we're going to do a Q&A after this, and I hope everyone will share. And there's my website and my Twitter and my Instagram. So thanks. I'm excited to talk to you guys. So I'm going to stop the share. I know Alex is here. So excited to talk to you guys.
Amazing. Thank you, Gina. I think the thing that strikes me about when you talk is you and obviously this is born of your years of research and then writing it into comprehensive and succinct words, but you just seem to put it across in such a simple way, how clear the unschooling and sort of more the intrinsic motivation path is. It's great. So I'm really glad that we had you along to the summit today. So yeah, this is the point where you get to ask Gina any questions you have. So if you have questions, please do pop them into the chat and I will pull them out as we go through. Um, I'm going to start with one. I'm going to sneak in and have one for myself because what I'd like to know, Gina, is like, what was your education experience growing up and how did that influence the work that you ended up going into?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very traditional education experience. I went to traditional schools, P through 12 in New York. My first year of college was at a public university. I ended up leaving. I was a teen mom. I got pregnant and I had my child. And really, it's interesting, right? You have all of these experiences within traditional education, which I love and I value so much. And then when I had my child, I really sort of was doing a lot of research. I was attending undergrad at the time. I had a baby at the time. And I was really just doing a lot of research on intrinsic motivation itself. And I was like, oh, yeah, like that's the way I want to live my life. That's the way I want my child to live their lives. And it's just sort of developed ever since.
Mm,
And so there was definitely a shift in my thinking, right? There are other ways to educate, there are other ways to learn. And that to me was just like a huge, wait, what? Right? There's this whole
mm.
world out there, and there's all these different educational choices. And that's really where my interest in intrinsic motivation came from.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? 'Cause I feel like I had that. I can't. Well, I probably could put my finger back to it is when I watched Sir Ken Robinson's talk on the TED Talk, and suddenly my brain was like, "Wait, hang on, there, there's more ways." Like, yeah, and it kind of it makes you opens up your brain to more opportunities. And I hope some people have had that experience here. How did you move into deciding to unschool your son? Um,
Yeah, I mean, it was a year by year decision. So, in New York State, kindergarten was not mandatory. At the time, he was having so much fun playing. He was really into geology. He was learning so much. And so, it was that year decision that was like, oh, well, it's optional anyway. So I can work and I can go to school and I can do all the things that I need to do. And he can come with me. And he really did. He grew up along with me. Um, and so it was really a year by year decision. And there were a couple of
mm,
years in the teenage years where he's like, I'd love to explore other options. I was like, let's do it. And in the end, he always chose homeschooling. He
mm,
felt value in it. He felt connected to his community. So it was a
mm,
really, really neat process. I always say it's the best thing I will ever do in my whole life. I would relive that experience over and over again. It's the best thing I'd ever do. And everyone asks what he's doing now. He's amazing. Like he's an incredible adult. He's 29 years old. He works for a publishing company as an editor. He edits medical journals, and he's also a classical guitarist. So
Oh.
really amazing human being, such an interesting human being. And yeah, my favorite person to be with, of course.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you can say that of your child.
Yeah.
I feel that too, but sometimes it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like the popular thing to say.
Yeah.
Um, so I've got a question. So I can see Derry Hannum has his hand up.
Yes.
I hope, Derry, you don't mind if I put your question across to Gina. So Derry has been advocating for what he's called a 20% modest proposal, which is basically where he's proposing that schools dedicate 20% of their curriculum time to essentially free time where students can pursue their interests, their concerns, their passions, their talents. So essentially, kind of unschooling, like 20% time for unschooling. So, what's your thinking around? And actually, you're the perfect person to ask this question of because you got your research around unschooling and you teach teachers, so you kind of got these foot in both camps. So how do you think, well, what's your thoughts around that and how do you think that would work in a sort of school setting?
Yeah, I mean, I love that, Derry. I love the 20%. I'll take any percent, right? I think a lot of learning in schools, because of different reasons, and we can get into this conversation, is more extrinsic. So anytime we can take 20% of the curriculum and devote it to interests and strengths and passions, there are models for this, in the United States and in the UK and everywhere. I think that's great. So my response wouldn't be not enough. My response would be let's get there, right? And see. I'll take 5%. I just want students to be able to have time to explore their interests and talents and strengths. And we have a lot of great teachers in the system that are also, able to really open up and have them do that. So good
Mm.
job, Derry.
Have you noticed, have you seen any examples where teachers have done that and have you sort of seen the impact that has on the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many high schools. There's High Tech High in California, and there's a specific high school in Massachusetts, and they've been able to create a day where there's, a period of time where students get more intrinsically motivated time. I will say this, I think that sometimes for kids who might not be intrinsically motivated or know what that even means, that free time is kind of hard, right? Because they really just don't even know what they're interested in, or they really just don't even know what strengths they bring to the table. And so part of that time, right, should be for exploration, for them to be
Mm.
able to explore those interests and strengths. Because sometimes you just don't know, and you need that time to kind of explore. And we also know it's kind of hard to deschool in a school environment, right? So it's that constant like, how do I do this? But I think it's an amazing, amazing way to introduce students to more intrinsically motivated, self-directed learning.
Mm. As you say, we've got to start somewhere.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so, there's loads of interesting questions coming through. So I've got a question from Naomi, which is very specific, but I'm interested to know. So Naomi says she's hoping to do a PhD in the UK around unschooling. Um, what do you feel are the gaps in research around unschooling that you'd like to see explored in the next few years?
Oh, it's so good, Naomi. Good luck. Yeah, I mean, there are so many gaps, right? Unschooling is this baby research field. I think the more you read articles on unschooling, the more you're like, oh, there's a gap here, there's a gap there. I think more kind of like thinking about specific subject unschooling is really important. It's something that people ask about all the time. Like, how do you unschool math? Or how do you unschool, right? Like history. People ask me that all the time. So I love the gap in like that specific subject area. I did an article on unschooling and reading, which was so interesting. And I'd love to do more work on that. But I think the specific subject thing is interesting. I think the perceptions of specific groups and how they perceive unschooling or homeschooling is interesting. I love cross-cultural studies of unschooling and reading those. So there's so many little things. As you read, you'll be like, "Ooh, I want to study this," and "Ooh, I want to study that." And we always have ideas for future research in all of our articles. So good luck, Naomi. I'm excited for you.
Good luck, Naomi, and do keep in touch if you do that. That sounds fascinating.
Yes, yes.
Um, so we've had Joseph in the chat now. Joseph has said, "Thank you for your presentation." He's currently reading Flow, the book Flow, and unschooling sounds a lot like an education built to create an environment that strongly supports a state of flow in children. Does that sound like an accurate description to you?
Ah, love Sism Holly. Yes. I mean, I think it at least facilitates the ability to have a sense of flow. And I think when you interview those who have been unschooled, a lot of times that's the one thing they'll mention. Like, I had the time to explore interests. I had the time to get into that sense of flow and really like, time goes away in flow. And that
Mm.
sounds exactly like unschooling to me. So yeah, I agree, Joseph.
Mm. It's really interesting because I do feel like school, and actually for a lot of people as well, when you become an adult, your work, you do not get that chance for flow because, either things are moving so quickly or you have to move from one thing to another. Like in school, it's like you've got a 50-minute class and then you're moving on, and that just isn't built into the way it works. And I know from my daughter's perspective, she will really get into flow and get really zoned in on something for like hours. And yeah, you just don't get that at school, do you? That's where we need our 20% proposal, Derry.
And it's the best part, right? It's the best part of unschooling.
Mm, amazing. So lots of flow for our children. Um, so Seraphima asks, could technology, gaming in particular, be considered a form of self-directed learning, or is it somewhat undermining the beauty of unschooling? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, no, I get this question a lot. Um, Anything that your child is interested in is worthy of being interested in, right? We went through years where my son's interests were not so academic. We had the bowling year, we had the Nintendo Wii year. I talk about that in my book, right? Like we had the year of golf. There were all of these interests that sometimes I question myself because they were non-academic interests. Of course, I loved the year of geology or the many years of geology, and I loved the years of classical guitar, which sounded so fancy. The years of like Nintendo did not sound so fancy. But I also really do. I mean, there's so many opportunities in the world of gaming and coding. So I think anything that a child is interested in and they're healthy and safe doing it is amazing, right? Like go
Mm,
do it. And of course, there's competence in like gaming and getting through those levels and being interested in like those internal parts. So I know controversial topic, but I am yay with all interests as long as they're healthy and safe.
mm. And it's so interesting you said there that there was a year of each of those things. And like as a parent, I'd be like, oh my goodness, if my child was only doing like one thing with majority of their time for a whole year, I'd be like panicking. But it's how do you maintain that sense of, do you know what? I'm just going with the flow. I'm just going to let my son do what he wants to do, and that's okay.
I didn't. I questioned every day. I questioned every day internally in journaling, right? Like I wanted him to know it was okay to explore whatever interests he wanted to explore. But I also questioned it every day. Other people questioned it every day. Um, and so, right, it was hard during those years, I think, to really explain to others, right? It was challenging
Mm,
to explain to others that I was okay with all of this. But I really was, that year of golf, right? He can golf as a business person now, and like he's like, yeah, that really worked out, right? And the year of gaming got him interested in like web development and coding. Even that year of bowling, right, was like very he sees value in it. So it's really not putting value on specific things while undermining other interests. It's really like
Mhm.
if you're interested in it, go for it. You never know what that interest is going to turn into.
Mm. That's so interesting. And looking back now, now that your son is older and he's been through college and all of that kind of thing, would you like what advice would you give to people who are going through that process right now?
Yeah, I always wanted to like title an article, "The Kids Are All Right," right? Like I wish I didn't stress. I wish I wasn't anxious. I
Mm,
wish I didn't care what people thought. I wish someone could tell me like everything was gonna be okay. And of course, you can't guarantee anything. Listen, you can't guarantee anything in a school environment
yeah.
either, right? But I really wish I enjoyed that time instead of being nervous about it.
Mm,
And of course, hindsight is 2020 vision.
mm.
I hope my son saw me like happy and joyful and really just so excited about the things that he was doing instead of my little anxious, nervous self that I probably was.
I'm sure you put that across quite well because it sounds like he's turned into a confident guy now. So, um, Catherine, though, he asks, did your son do any exams? And if so, when and what stage did he do them?
Yes. So New York State is a highly regulated state when it came to homeschooling. So we had to test from fourth grade on every other year. And it was fine. Like I was nervous about it and he wasn't, and it was totally fine. When he went into graduate school, he had to take the GREs. And he really, I mean, again, like he really taught himself. He test prepped himself through the GREs.
Mm,
In a lot of research, we always like conclude that, the greatest gift of unschooling is that unschoolers really know how to learn. And I think that's
mm,
really, really important, right? If they need to get to a specific goal, unschoolers know how to do it. And so
mm,
I saw him test prep himself through calculus, through pre-calculus, things I didn't, directly teach him during our unschooling. And it was really interesting to watch. And he got into the grad
mm.
school of his dreams. And he's, again, um, I was more worried about the exams than he was.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because that's one thing I think about. Not that my daughter's 11, so I'm not really thinking about exams for her at the moment, but I always think like, how would she do if she's not being brought up in that school environment and then having to to sit in a school exam. But you're absolutely right. If they're motivated to do it, they'll learn how, right? Just like they learn everything else.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I'll add that the one thing my son will share and did learn in college is that when he entered college, he was like, "Oh, I get it, right? People don't take notes on what they're interested in, right? People take notes on what the test is on." And that was like a
Yeah.
learning, right? That was like a first semester learning, and I felt that that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, we've got lots of questions. So Debbie says, what would you suggest is the best way to support choice making? So you were saying about the supported decision making. What are your top tips on doing that successfully?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? I now talk about decision making all the time. We at Hunter have created a framework for decision making called Guts and Go. And so when students are making decisions, you want them to gather information, you want them to understand that information, you want them to think about consequences, you want them to seek out support, right? So the guts part of it. You want them to pause and really think about their decision making, and then they can go and make the decision.
Mm,
Right. So when thinking about choice making, it's really about us and them thinking about decision making steps
mhm,
and going that way, right? Like we always talk to kids and say, okay, there's a difference between like a quick choice and a more thoughtful decision. And how do we do that? And
Mm.
also talking about choices and decisions, practicing. I think, in schools, there's not a ton of practice on choice making and decision making. But within homeschool and free school and democratic school environments, there's a lot of practice surrounding that. And that's
Mm.
always interesting. The more practice kids get making decisions, the better they get at it. And it's the same for us.
Yeah. Yeah, interestingly, like one thing I've observed is that some of my friends' children who've reached the end of their education sort of time, either that's at A levels or after university or after college, and they suddenly have quite a big decision to make, which is, what am I going to do next? And they really, really struggle with that because they haven't had that chance to practice, right? And that must be something that comes a lot easier if you've been having to make decisions about your life all the way through your childhood.
Yeah, decision making is about practice.
Mm, yeah, really interesting. Okay, so Fiona gives a little information about her home educating journey with her autistic child. So she's only 5 weeks in, and she says she can see that unschooling is our future, and I'm really excited by this, which is really cool. Especially as she's an early years teacher, so lots of unschooling going on in early years. Um, I know the importance of playing in a child's development. What would you advise for my parenting role, um, as he can be very repetitive in his play? Should I trust that he'll naturally want to try new things? Um, and perhaps this hasn't been the case before because he's been burnt out. So if you could, like, yeah, talk a little bit around that and your experience with that, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't give parenting advice, partly because there's no perfect parent, right? Um, I will say from my experience, and definitely read the Unschooling Students with Disabilities article. It's such a good article. It was so nice to gather stories from individuals. Um, you know, repetition is great. It makes all of our lives easier. It also provides a calming force.
Mm,
We all know that once students are transitioning either from a schooled environment to an unschooled environment or from any environment to an unschooled environment, that there is a time of deschooling. So we kind of have to undo all of those things that we thought before. And so maybe he's been burnt out. We burn out as adults, right? And so just being really patient with the process, and I would trust that he'll naturally want to try new things. Again, I don't give advice. I just, can talk from experience. And all I can say is, sometimes trying new things is fun, especially when there's no pressure surrounding it. If
mm,
kids are feeling any sort of pressure, external pressure, it tends to be harder. But if they're feeling like they have an autonomy supportive environment, they tend to really grow in the way where they try new things when they're ready.
mm. It makes me think back to when you were saying about your son having the year of golf and the year of the Nintendo Wii. Like, there's no pressure to rush into trying something new, right? Because they'll find it in their own time.
They'll find it. They'll find it. I think
Mm,
part of the hardest part of unschooling is really trusting the process, right? Not
mm,
everything is going to be what we see as academic. Not everything is going to go the way we planned. I could promise you it doesn't go the way you plan in school environments either, right? So it's not the unschooled environment that that's happening in. So yeah, it's a lot of trusting the process.
mm. It's really interesting. I don't know if your research has kind of delved back into the history of education very much, but it always, when you say that about trusting the process and that it doesn't always go right in school either, it's interesting really now to think that we are just completely well, we're changing our minds now, but we're completely sort of born into this system where school is the way, and and other ways are risky. But actually, as you say, like, why is school the way? Like, who decided that? Why did that become the the right way to do things? And because at some point, right, a lot of kids were unschooled, and it was just normal. That was just how it was. And it's just interesting. Like, I don't know if you have ever explored that.
All the time. And the way I
Mm,
frame it is, right, you have this myriad of school choices in terms of education. You have public, private, charter, homeschool, unschool, and they're all wonderful, right?
mm,
And the choice that you make is the one that works for you and your child and your family.
mm,
And my research has always been, right, like no one should ever judge any sort of educational choice that they make for their own child because they're making it for their child and their family. Uh,
mm.
so there's all sorts of choices in this world. And again, unschooling is as legitimate as all of the others.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, Gina. Okay, so Emma and Adam have obviously come on together. They've asked about whether there could be more flexibility in the school system, such as flexi schooling. So their example is they've got two children who are 3 days in school and 2 days home ed. Um, and um, yeah, they're struggling with the switch between free time and being told what to do at school. So again, using your sort of experience of working with teachers and schools and that kind of thing, do you think that's something that could become more popular, or
So I'll say it depends upon the district. In the United States, it depends upon the state that you live in. Some states allow for flexibility between school and homeschool. Most do not.
mm,
And so a lot of it is just defined by the state and the place in which we live. I love the idea of more flexibility within the school system. I talk all the time about flexible learning environments. My teachers would love that as well, right? They would love their jobs to be more flexible as well.
mm,
In terms of, right, like having, that transition's hard, right? You're going from one environment to another. They both have different rules or different rhythms. Um, but yeah, I mean, it works so beautifully for many students. So it really just depends on where you live.
mm. Yeah, that's
I'm
interesting.
definitely a proponent of flexible school environments.
Yeah. And it's really positive actually that you say that your students are really supportive of that, because they're going to be the next school leaders, right? So they can start looking at whether this is the stuff they want to bring in to their schools. Fantastic. Okay. So we've got a question from Kate. For children who are coming out of a traditional setting and into a setting that's more self-directed, um, could they benefit from guidance in exploring themselves and identifying their interests? Or is time the only way to allow them the authenticity to develop?
Yeah, I don't ever think there's any one way, right?
Mm,
There's no like, right, here's the right path and here's how to do it. I think you do what works for your family and you do what works for your schedule.
mm,
Um, and like just like, there's a spectrum to intrinsic motivation. It's not just like you're either extrinsically motivated or intrinsically motivated. I like stickers and stars just like all the rest, right? Um, but really, it really is the nice thing about homeschooling and unschooling is there's some flexibility within the environment. And so you create the structure and you create the rhythm. And
mm,
if your house allows for that kind of, unstructured time and space, go for it. There's no one right way to do things.
mm. And what about the like self-directed school settings? Because I know you obviously went and researched in Sudbury Valley School, and there were various others that you mentioned, North Star and so on. Um, I know we've heard from some school sort of startups that they do have to allow this time when students start with them to deschool. But have you seen anything which is like a guided process for that? Or again, is it just kind of welcome into the community, take your time, and you'll find your autonomy at some point when you're here?
Yeah, it's interesting. So a lot of the research I do, I did a research study with Peter and Kevin Curry Knight on Hudson Valley Sudbury School. I did a study on the alumni of Astra Nova School. And remember, when you're doing studies on alumni perspectives, right, they're looking back on their experience. And so some students, even after graduating, said, my gosh, right? Like, I understand now what was happening in terms of this freedom and choice, but I don't think I understood then. And it was just sort of this graduated process. And some students are like, I loved it all the time. I got it, right? I loved being
Mm,
able to do what I loved and was interested in the whole time. So I think schools do it differently. Every school has a specific philosophy. And so I think one of the things, if you're considering like a free or democratic school, is to really study and really research what the philosophy is, ask those types of questions to those
mm,
schools of self-directed learning, because they all definitely have their own specific philosophy about that.
mm. Interesting. So again, it's that like difference in choice, isn't it, between
Yeah.
different settings? Um, so I'm going to ask one more question, and I've got one to sort of round off. So Wendy says, she calls about Carol Sanford talks about not outsourcing our thinking to others, in No More Gold Stars. She calls it self-determination theory of knowledge. Um, do you think or know if there's a greater link or connection between the theories of, yeah, self-determination theory of knowledge and the self-determination theory of Deci and Ryan that you were talking about?
I, I love that you asked this question. I'm also going to be brutally, brutally honest, right? Deci and Ryan did all of this work, and then you see it in different places, right? I'm always going to go back to Deci and Ryan. I don't know Sanford's work, so I can't specifically speak to Sanford's work. Um, when the book Drive was written, I'm like, oh, this is all Deci and Ryan, right? And you just put it in like
Mm,
accessible book form when they
yeah.
had written an accessible book too. As an academic, I'm so like, right, like give credit where credit is due. So
Mm.
I don't know Sanford's work, but now I'm gonna look into it. So I don't have an answer for you, but I bet there's a connection. And I really give Deci and Ryan credit for self-determination theory, because without them, um, not a lot of talk about self-determination or self-direction was happening in the psychological or
Mm.
education world before them.
Brilliant. I think they're definitely going on my reading list. So thank you very much
Yeah,
for
so good.
that. And finally, Gina, I'm thinking about if you could design, or if you could see a dream school or education system that if for 25 years in the future, what would it look like for you?
Yeah, it looks like different things for me.
Mm,
Um, it just looks like a world where educational choices are all accepted and embraced. It looks like a place where kids are happy and loved, and most of all, safe, and really get to explore their strengths and interests. You can find these in environments today, right? It's all about really giving parents and families and communities the freedom to make these
mhm,
different types of choices. So I think you can find places where kids are healthy and safe and loved and intrinsically motivated. You can find them in public school systems. You can find them in homeschooling and unschooling and privates and charters. But that's really my dream, right? My dream is that we find places that work for all of us, where kids are happy,
mhm.
safe, and loved.
Yeah, been an interesting thing that I feel has come up a lot this week, actually, is this sense of choice. So yes, thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful having you here, Gina, and you're always so smiley and happy. So I'm really glad that you came along to round off this week for us. Um, so thank you for everyone for turning up today as well. So all the attendees as well, thank you for coming in and for your really great questions. Um, as a thank you for you coming in today, we actually have a copy of one of Gina's books, The Homeschooling Starter Guide, which is also going on my reading list because I feel that's very relevant for me right now. And it has a personal note from Gina in there as well. So to see let's see who the winner of tonight's book is. It is Lydia Hardwick. So congratulations, Lydia. Well done. If you want to get in touch with us, Lydia, at info@educationstartups.org, we'll grab your address and we'll get that sent out to you so that you can read that to your heart's content. Thank you very much, Lydia. So in terms of what comes next, we all get a little break over the weekend to rest, and then we can let all of our ideas percolate before we have our final day of the Inspire Education Summit next Monday, the 25th of November. And on that day, we're actually meeting Zoe Neal Redhead next Monday, Gina. So we're really, really looking forward to that. She is, for those who don't know, the principal of the world famous democratic Summerhill School. So that's really exciting. And we've also got a fantastic expert insight panel of young learners, all who are in self-directed learning settings or unschooled. So that will be absolutely fascinating. You definitely need to come along to that. And then in the evening, we will be having a panel of experts who are founders of their own schools or learning communities, and you will get a chance to ask lots of questions of them. So if you're thinking that that might be something you'd be interested in doing, that would be a great session to come to. And we will be officially launching our new membership platform as well for those who are wanting to create their own school or learning community. So absolutely not one to miss. But thank you again, Gina, for being here. We are now going to move into our networking session. So anyone who would like to stay on for networking, I think Gina are you able to stay on for a little while longer? Fantastic.
Yes.
Excellent. So Gina's going to stay in for just a little longer so she can meet some of you. If you'd like to stay, please do hang on, and I'm going to press a few buttons so that we can stop the recording and you can turn on your cameras and mics. So let me do that right now.
Thanks all so much for coming. It was such a joy to be with you.